Okay, so now what we're going to look at is we're going to go into the whole nuts and bolts of project management. Okay, so when we're looking at projects, we're looking at we're going to conduct an activity. A project is usually defined as, it has a limited time frame. It is of a nature, so it's like an event type activity, as opposed to business as usual. So what that means is it needs to have a fair few considerations that separate it from what we'd normally expect in day-to-day operations, because a project really has the beginning and an end and a whole bunch of other things that need to happen in the middle. It's not something that is ongoing and sustained as far as becoming normal business. All right, so the first thing we need to start thinking about is we need to understand, well, what is it we're going to do? And the way we start to define the project is the main document that we get to is a scope. Okay, so every project should have a scope, and the project scope is the overview of the intentions and defines what the project is going to be about. Okay, so it's really about creating agreements with our clients and stakeholders so that we've all got an exact picture of exactly what's going on, so there's no confusion and things don't change halfway through the project. Okay, so the first thing we begin with is a very clear understanding of what's expected and what's going to take place. So the first question is things like, what do you intend to achieve? Okay, so what is it that we're going to achieve in order to meet those stakeholders' demands or requirements? Okay, so what are we going to be doing? What are their expected outcomes? So we need to think about how much time is expected to take, things like costs, quality, all those sort of clearly defined things that we need to make sure that we understand. So I need to know, how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost me, and what exactly do you expect at the end? So what's the quality standard we're aiming for? Obviously thinking about how long this project is expected to take is really going to come into it, okay, because time obviously has a whole lot of implications in it itself. Okay, so what will also be covered off is what sort of activities will be undertaken in order to complete the project. So we need to start thinking through, so what are the different tasks that are going to happen, what sort of things are going to happen. We need to start thinking about risks, so what could go wrong while we're undertaking the project. So what are the challenges or obstacles we face, what are the concerns we have, in other words, what might go wrong. We need to start also thinking about who else might we need to consult. So will we need to speak to any extra people? Do we need to speak to accountants, lawyers? Do we need to bring in safety experts? Might I need to be looking at outsourcing, talking to suppliers? Okay, so who are the other types of people that might be involved in the process? Okay, so having at least all of those initial answers are going to help us create a scoping document that will define what the project looks like so that we can all get agreement on exactly what's going to take place. All right. So once we've got our scoping document down, and there's a whole bunch of different layouts and styles for that, but really what you're looking is how much of what, by when, by who, to what standard, all those sort of really clear questions to make sure everyone knows exactly what's going on so that you can get agreement between yourself and whoever's requesting or requiring the project to go ahead, or between you and the project manager, whoever happens to be involved. They all need to have a very clear scope to give common understanding and know exactly what we're setting out to achieve before we begin. All right, so what we need to do then now is to really start thinking about what is the business case. Okay, so what we're starting to talk about then is we need to do a little bit of background market analysis. So what was going on or what is going on that's created the opportunity here? We need to start thinking about the force field analysis. So what are the things working for us, what's working against us, and what's our position of equilibrium. At this point, we also need to think about doing our SWOT analysis. Okay, so going through SWOT, our cost-benefit analysis, so how much are we putting in and what are we likely to get in return, and starting to think about, what are the other alternatives to the project. So just to cap those off, background market. Okay, so, what's created the opportunity, my force field analysis. Okay, so quickly having a look at what factors are coming into play here, what's working for us, what's working against us. Do a quick SWOT chart to make sure, do we have the strengths, weakness, what are the opportunities, what are the threats? And then we also need to think about our cost-benefit analysis. So how much in, what are we going to get back? And then think about what are my alternatives. So is there do I have to do it this way? Is there a plan B? What are my various options there? Okay, so we don't always want to say that's the only one way to do it. We might think about what else we might need. Okay, now we've got a scope in place and we've started to think about our business case and we started to detail that out. Okay, we're making sure we have as much good, solid information All right, do not cut corners at this stage, okay? Because a lot of people they become in love with their idea and it's the only way, so they try and fit everything to make sure their idea is the only way forward, whereas actually, there might be a whole bunch of alternatives. So we need to be really honest about this point. The next thing is we need to think about committing resources. Okay, so now we're going to move into the case of we need to start thinking about, management needs to decide whether or not they want to commit the resources they have within their organisation, time, people, money, etc., and they need to be able to know that the activity is going to succeed. Okay, so what we need to do is we're going to be using this to help them make that decision to commit or not to commit. Based on this, we've got a scope, we know what's going on, we've thought about what's working for us against us, we looked at our SWOT. We looked at the cost-benefit analysis. Now we come down to the point of we need to start making the decision whether we're going to put the resources in or not. Okay, and remember, there's a lot of competing alternatives. So in business, there's always something going on. It won't just be the one opportunity they've seen. They will have seen multiple opportunities. So what we're really trying to do here is to make sure that we really identify what are the driving forces that are going to make this project work. What makes us think we can justify spending the resources in this project as opposed to 20 other projects we might have come up with. Okay, so that commitment of resources, that decision that needs to be made based on really solid information, which means that research and thinking about, to some degree, if you need to, do I actually need to go back out and do a steep analysis and actually have a good look at what's going around me, just to make sure that I've got a clear understanding. Because once we commit those resources, we're already in play, okay? We're already incurring cost, and once we start incurring cost, the risk is that, things fall over. All right, so just sort of recapping on the scope and getting a bit more detail on the scope. The sort of things the scope might include also are the stakeholder analysis. Okay, so when we talked about who else is involved, we can start to detail that. So stakeholder analysis, who's involved. So remember, a stakeholder is anyone who can affect or is affected by our activity. Okay, so we might have to look at, could it be the local community? And that's going to come out in STEEP when we start to look at, what are the social aspects and environmental aspects. So what stakeholders are going to be involved? What are their objectives? How might they be affected by us and what is that going to mean? We might also make sure that whoever's requesting we do the project, if it's coming from our managers, that we have a really clear expectation of what they want. And a broad outline of all the work to be performed. So what we need to make sure is that when we're detailing that out for here, that our scope also includes any products we need, any equipment we need, what services we're requiring, all that detail. So all those things are going to really come in to allow the person to make a decision about whether we begin or not. All right. So make sure that by the time you get to here, you've got an overview of any organizational or environmental or technical issues. So if there's anything that is going to come up, which you probably identified during a STEEP, you make sure that that's covered off and load it back into your scope there as well. Think about making sure you've got very clear objectives at this case is really important. Okay, so while you're making the business case, that you can say this is what we're trying to achieve and this is what we're going to get out of it. Particularly when you're looking at your cost-benefit analysis, highly important. And start to think about exactly who are you going to have get involved in this activity. From your own team. So what are their skills, what are their abilities, and what are their qualifications? All right, so there's a lot of considerations going into here, but making sure you've got the right team, the right people with the right resources, you understand what equipment they need, clear measurable goals, you've done your SWOT, you've looked at the environment around you, you've thought about the stakeholders inside the project and outside the project. The more robust that picture, the better your decision making is going to be and the more successful your project's going to end up. Really spend the time. This is an immensely important time to really get in and dig all that information out. Make sure you've really detailed it. Make sure everyone's had time to have a good thought and input, and that should start to set you up pretty well. All right. Other considerations are think about how this project is going to relate to other projects in your organisation. Make sure you've got a really clear benefit statement so we all know what we're going to get out of this. You've talked about your risk factors, so make sure you've got a good risk analysis. What can go wrong, what are the obvious things that you can see, and then think it through. And also, if there's anything that you're not going to be doing as part of this, make sure everyone knows what this project is, and make sure they also know what this project isn't. So we are doing this, but we're not going to be looking at that factor, okay? Because sometimes people sort of go, oh, but you were working on this, so surely you can throw in that. No, there is no surely. If it's not on the scope, it doesn't exist. Okay, so everything has to be included there, so there's no surprises further down the track, and everyone knows exactly what they can expect. Because if everyone knows what they can expect, when we go to the decision to commit the resources, we don't have any unwelcome surprises later on and find out either we now no longer have the resources we thought we needed because we've now expanded out what we're doing, and that the people making the decision, they absolutely know exactly what they're up for because they don't want to get any surprises either, all right? Otherwise, bad things happen and your project starts to spiral out of control really quickly. All right, so that's the initial consideration on the scoping, starting to develop your business case and thinking about committing your resources. So all those things, how much of what, by when, by who, what are the skills of my people, what will we be doing, what's the benefit to the organization, what are we going to get out of this, what are the clear goals, how do we measure it, what's in it for us, and why this project over many other projects that might take our time. All right, so that's the first phase of beginning to define the project.